they decided that, yeah, because the question in that case was, all right, we have census data that are used to draw these districts. They're used to try to make the districts equal in population. And you have to make them really super close to equal in population when you're drawing congressional districts in particular. And so then the question was, okay, if we're now doing it in the middle of the decade and these census data are kind of old at this point, is this really satisfying the one person, one vote requirement, where all the districts are equal in population? And the court said, yeah, go ahead. You can do it as many times as you want in the middle of the decade. You just have to do it at least once.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to a new episode of Power and Flower. I am Seth Maskett.
And I'm John Hagner.
We are a political scientist and a political consultant who are trying to understand and explain what is going on with U.S. politics. We also care deeply about pastries. One of the many dramatic political stories going on in U.S. politics today concerns redistricting. So Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, in coordination with the White House, is pushing the Texas state legislature to redraw the congressional district map prior to the 2026 midterm elections, likely creating roughly 5 new Republican-leaning districts. Republicans have talked about doing this in other states as well, including Florida and Indiana. Meanwhile, some Democratic leaders, like Governors Gavin Newsom of California and Kathy Hochul in New York, have threatened to respond in kind, redistricting their states in the Democrats' favor if Texas goes ahead with its plans. Now, as we know, redistricting is typically done just once a decade, right after the national census. So all this is raising some questions, including whether this is even legal or constitutional, what either side could reasonably hope to achieve in all this, what this looks like when the dust settles. So to help us understand this, we have invited to the show Eric McGhee, who is truly one of the nation's experts on redistricting. A little bit of background on Eric. He is a senior fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California. He focuses on elections, legislative behavior, political reform, and demography. His research has appeared in numerous academic journals and cited widely in major media outlets. Importantly, Eric coined the concept of the efficiency gap, which is a widely used measure in gerrymandering, and co-authored a legal test based on this measure that has been presented before the U.S. Supreme Court in high-profile litigation. I actually know Eric from graduate school days. He was a UC Berkeley student, but occasionally slummed it for a while down at UCLA with us down in the Southland. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we'll just start off with some basics. So Governor Abbott in Texas is pushing the state legislature to adopt a new map prior to 2026. So basic question, is this legal? Is this constitutional? And would it be the same answers for other states?
It is legal and constitutional within certain constraints. The court about 20 years ago explicitly considered the question of whether you could draw a new map in the middle of a decade in a case that involved Texas, of all places. And they decided that, yeah, because the question in that case was, all right, we have census data that are used to draw these districts. They're used to try to make the districts equal in population. And you have to make them really super close to equal in population when you're drawing congressional districts in particular. And so then the question was, okay, if we're now doing it in the middle of the decade and these census data are kind of old at this point, is this really satisfying the one person, one vote requirement, where all the districts are equal in population? And the court said, yeah, go ahead. You can do it as many times as you want in the middle of a decade. You just have to do it at least once to reflect the new census data. In terms of pushing for more partisan representation for your party, that too is completely legal by federal law. The court considered that question about 8 years ago in a case called Rucho v. Common Cause, and they decided that yes, it's totally legal to do any amount of partisan gerrymandering that you want according to the U.S. Constitution. Now, different states have different answers to that question. They have sometimes some extra laws that are in place. They have maybe a commission that is separate from the legislature that draws the maps. They may have courts that have interpreted the state constitution to place constraints on partisan gerrymandering, but in Texas, none of that stuff applies. There is the question of the Voting Rights Act. So there are some limits to what you can do break up in terms of breaking up um, districts that are majority Latino or Black in the case of Texas. But there is actually some litigation coming down the pike that may remove some of those constraints as well. So, but that may not happen probably won't happen in time for the 2026 election. So there are a few constraints, but not very many.
Wow. Okay. So, are there other states where let's see, what is being done in Texas right now? Are there other states where this sort of thing could potentially work and have some kind of a yield for Republicans?
Yeah, so there are a few. So Ohio is maybe the best example because for reasons that relate to their redistricting process, they actually are going to have to redraw their districts anyway. And so there was an expectation that they were probably going to the legislature there, which is Republican governor, Republican legislature, that they were going to try and juice a few more seats out of that plan for Republicans. It's currently a 10-5 Republican advantage, so there's quite a few that they could potentially juice. Maybe two or three. Um, Indiana is another case where there's a couple of Democratic seats, and maybe they could get one more there. Kansas, Kentucky, Missouri, there are North Carolina, which is just the endless focus of litigation, and is actually the state that was at issue in the Rucho case that I just mentioned a minute ago. So all of those, they might be able to get one or two more seats out of the plan that they currently have. Florida is also discussed. Florida does have a provision in its constitution that says that the legislature is not allowed to draw districts to advantage one party. But it's going to just matter. All that matters is how the state Supreme Court in Florida interprets that provision, and they've been very relaxed about it in the past.
Yeah.
So
It's the same issue in Ohio, which you mentioned, right? Ohio has actually very strict limits in the Constitution, but that is interpreted by a Republican Supreme Court, including the governor's son, who simply chooses to believe that the words on the page don't mean what they say. So yeah.
Yeah, so there's lots of these, one or two here, one or two there, that you could, and pretty soon you're talking about real numbers. Uh, but none of it is guaranteed, just something that people are talking about. There are, of course, other Republican-controlled states, like in the Deep South, where the Democratic seats in those states are generally majority Black, and that's going to make it under the current legal regime, which is the Voting Rights Act. There are constraints to what you can do with those districts, and so there may not be a whole lot that can happen in those states.
Okay. So is there, I don't know if anyone sort of tallied up all the places this could conceivably occur. Like, do we have like an idea of a potential yield for Republicans in terms of House seats altogether, if this actually works?
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen an actual like hard tally. A lot of I should note that a lot of what I'm spieling off here is from Kyle Kondik on Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball. He wrote a really great piece that kind of lays out the lay of the land. And so I would recommend people go and take a look at that if they're interested in going a little bit deeper.
We'll post a link to that.
But if you kind of think about the numbers you add them all up, sort of the optimistic Republican side, I would say maybe as high as 15 seats.
Okay.
And then of course there are some opportunities on the Democratic side. They're not as extensive though. So there's the California thing that we may talk about a little bit more here in a minute. Illinois is already a pretty heavy Democratic gerrymander. There's only 3 Republican seats in that state. And so, could they juice a few more Democratic seats? Yeah, possibly. Maryland is another example where they have 1 Republican seat, and they have the trifecta of completely controlling the legislature and the governor. But the state Supreme Court is still has a lot of appointees from when the Republican governor was in control, and so it's it's not clear how smooth the paths would be there, but certainly that would be another option for a Democratic seat. And people talk about Oregon, which already has, again, the same deal. Like it's 4-1 Democratic in a state that is comfortably but not overwhelmingly Democratic. And could you get one more seat out of that? It's an open question.
And then people talk about New York, but I'm not quite sure exactly what the status there is, Eric. Do you know?
Yeah, that is actually an excellent question. So New York is the other big one, and as you mentioned, Kathy Hochul was talking about it, about wanting to do something. It really, to my mind, it seems unlikely there because there are clear constraints about mid-decade redistricting and about redistricting for partisan advantage. And although, again, some of these things are open to interpretation, but I think mid-decade redistricting, maybe is not. Although, again, I'm not an expert in New York law, but you do have to, in order, if you're going to actually change the Constitution, you have to pass that constitutional change into separate legislative sessions that are separated by an election. And so it's not something, and then I think it goes to the voters after that. And so it's not something that could be done before the 2026 election. So I just think New York seems like, again, there's always the possibility of some creative legal approach, but it just seems like New York is kind of off the table.
Yeah, and with so many things, the rules apply to Democrats and do not apply to Republicans. So yeah, in states where there are bans against redistricting, like Florida, sometimes that's for Republicans, those rules tend to be less strictly held. But one point on this, and Eric, I thought that was an amazing rundown, and thank you for it. One thing that's just a hobby horse of mine is that whenever we're talking about these seat categories, they're not as hard and fast as they might seem. Like I think Texas is a great example. We've seen the Republicans draft map there, and it's definitely more Republican. But one of the 5 seats that people are adding up is Henry Cuellar's district, which is only a couple points more Republican than the seat he is very comfortably held. So, he certainly might lose it. Like we'll see what happens. It's a worse district than he holds now, but I think some people could look at that map and say, "Oh, it's 5 more Republican seats." Other people say it's 4. You talk about Ohio. Right now, the map is right now there are 10 Democrats or 5 Democrats and 10 Republicans from Ohio, but the map doesn't actually have 5 Democratic seats. It has 3 swing seats, all of which Democrats have won because the Democrats have run stronger candidates in those 3 districts. So, it's really a 10-2-3 map that the 3 are Dems. And so, I think the math can get tough on this. And for listeners' context, I was the data director at the DCCC in 2011. So my job was to talk to members of Congress about what was happening in redistricting. And these distinctions are often really hard to make because, there's we even a district that's drawn to elect Republicans, a weak candidate in a bad year, things can change. So usually when we're looking at districts on the partisan operative side, we look at districts that are more than 55% Democratic as safe and more than 55% Republican as safe. And we're looking at sort of gradients within that 45 to 55 range. So, I think one of the things they're talking about doing in Texas is moving districts that are 53 to 55, right? And like it was on the edge of the battlefield, maybe it's a little bit further off. But, at the end of the day, even as much as Republicans in these states may not want to, voters will still have a say on this.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that there is a very good chance that 2026 is a good year for Democrats. We obviously can't know for sure how good, um, but it seems likely, just historically, that it will be that the vote will shift in a Democratic direction, and so that could make seats that are really marginal when they're considered in the context of the 2024 election to be more comfortably Democratic in the 2026 election. But you're absolutely right that there's this whole other dimension of competitiveness that is separate. And in fact, one of the interesting things about the Texas plan is that it is actually not that heavily Republican right now. What they did in 2021 was they drew a plan that gave them the extra 2 seats that Texas was allotted from the census, and then they made sure that everybody was safe. Democrats and Republicans. It was what they would call an incumbent protection gerrymander, with a couple of exceptions. And that seemed like maybe a great idea in the context of 2020 when Biden did really well in Texas relative to past Democrats. But in the context of 2022 and 24, when things shifted back in Republican direction in Texas, uh, it didn't allow them to pick up any new seats when they were winning more votes. So they kind of boxed themselves in that sense, and in some ways, what they're doing in this new plan that they proposed is opening up and giving themselves the seats that they had boxed themselves out of in the redraw at the regular decennial process.
Yeah, and they're doing it largely by relying on Latino voters who swung pretty heavily to Trump in
Yep.
2024, and they're making a bet that those folks stay. One
Yes.
story on this, as I said, in 2011, I worked at the DCCC, and the only state that Democrats had a partisan control of the process with a large number of seats was Illinois. And the legislature there drew Illinois' sixth congressional district in DuPage County in the suburbs, actually the district that I grew up in. So I paid a lot of attention to it. In 2011, that seat was drawn to be a Republican vote sink, right? Every single precinct, it was every Republican they could find in the suburbs of Chicago, they put into this one district to make the other districts more competitive. And this was in 2011. By 2016, that became a safe Democratic seat because Donald Trump became the face of the Republican Party, because the suburbs are changing. This is a highly educated country club kind of a district, and those people simply are no longer Republicans. So this seat that was drawn to be the most Republican it could possibly be ended up electing Sean Casten, a fairly progressive Democrat. In that cycle, it is now a safe Democratic seat that the Republicans don't even contest. So, I think some of this is you can as you said, the census is done once every 10 years. Political events change slowly. People build these maps, and then sometimes the ground shifts under them.
Yep. Absolutely. It's
Hmm.
not a perfect science. And when we were working on legal tests for partisan gerrymandering, we were always looking for a wide window around the expected outcome of the map, including some sensitivity testing about how it would change when votes shifted one way or the other, in order to try and understand the robustness of the map in the sense that the way that you're talking about it.
Um, so, Eric, since you're Mr. Efficiency Gap guy, I wanted to ask you, like, just overall, like broadly across the two parties, do you have a sense whether Democratic or Republican House districts tend to be drawn more efficiently? That is, if there actually was somehow like an all-out redistricting war across the states, like which party stands to benefit more?
Well, so the interesting thing about the House right now is that it's pretty much perfectly balanced between the parties by kind of any one of the partisan fairness metrics you want to use, which is wasn't true 10 years ago, um,
Hmm.
and it wasn't true for a lot of the last decade. But there's been a lot of activity. The U.S. Supreme Court decided not to get involved in uh, partisan redistricting and putting any constraints on it. But a lot of the sort of worst acting states did, and there were, at least briefly, in the case of North Carolina, some changes that made the maps less biased. But Pennsylvania has much less biased maps. Michigan has much less biased maps. Um,
Right.
for a little bit, North Carolina had less biased maps. It's been something that has been a bit of a trend. And so now what you have, but there's also the guardrails are thrown off. So that means in some cases, partisan gerrymandering happened on the Democratic side where it didn't really happen in 2010. And so you have more of a kind of, what you have is a national balance number, but state by state, the numbers are sometimes pretty far in one direction or another. Um, the uh, the irony is that right now, based on the 2024 outcome, there's just a smidge of a tilt toward the Democrats at the national level because the Republicans didn't pick up as many seats as they might have wanted. I think
Hmm.
I think a lot of that actually, at least part of that is from California, where there's 3 seats that the Democrats won by just the barest of margins, and that those could easily have gone the other way. And in when you're thinking about like the efficiency of a redistricting plan, what you want for an efficient plan that's going to maximize your seats for the vote share you have is to win your seats um, by small but comfortable margins, and you want the other party to either lose or to be stuck in a district that's overwhelmingly supports their party, so that there's a lot of sort of votes that don't contribute to a win, if you want to think about it that way. Um, it's not from a partisan gerrymandering perspective, it's not ideal to have a thing like in California where you win the seat by just the barest of margins because that's too fragile, right? You could lose it again. It's better to give yourself a little bit more of a padding than that. Um,
Mhm.
but I think so. That's kind of a long-winded way of saying that the overall kind of national climate right now is, or national number is pretty even between the two parties. Um, and then, as I said, like when you go through each of the states and where the opportunities lie, if you were to sort of rerun the 2024 election, which is gets to John's point about how things can move around, but I think there are more opportunities on the Republican side than on the Democratic side. But there's not necessarily zero opportunities on the Democratic side.
Um, Eric, one of the things that you'll see, Texas is talking about doing this. I think they started this fight. A lot of Democratic states like California are talking about um, retaliating. I know that a lot of people hate this idea, right? A lot of Democrats, a lot of good government groups, a lot of newspaper editorial board types just absolutely hate the idea of Democrats responding, and it doesn't sit well with a lot of Democrats who do mostly disagree on principle with gerrymandering. Are there other options that are out there to fight this kind of thing, though? Like, you mentioned the Russo versus Common Cause case. Like, it seems to me like I spent a lot of my career thinking about redistricting and wish that the bill the Democrats introduced in Congress to ban the practice would have passed. I wish it was the law. But are there any other options that are out there to fight this? Like, do you think another court case against Texas has any avenue of success? Is there anything we can do? Or is it, you know, fight fire with fire, or accept that the map is going to be slanted in favor of Republicans pretty dramatically?
Yeah, I think the so right now, uh, in the states that are talking about acting, I don't think that there's a lot of options. So there's the Voting Rights Act, and if there's not really a Voting Rights Act case, then I don't know I'm not quite sure what the claim would be, because the U.S. Supreme Court, as we've been talking about, has stepped out of this domain of partisan gerrymandering. So
Yeah, the
there are some.
former RNC intern John Roberts doing one solid for the home team on that one. Yeah.
Um, and so I don't see a lot of options there. Um,
Mhm.
and then I think the best one beyond that is for Congress to act, because Congress does have, under the U.S. Constitution, does have the authority to regulate congressional elections, the time, place, and manner of those elections, and so they could uh, and tried to, as you noted, there was HR1 was like, it was the first bill introduced, and it was meant to be a sort of grab bag of election reforms, and they just never could get it past a filibuster. So there's getting it past a filibuster in the future may also be difficult if this turns into an all out fist fight and gets really ugly and chaotic. Uh, is it possible that both sides would grow tired of all this and want to pass something that would make everything seem a little bit more predictable? I don't know. I can't say that I'm super hopeful, but that's what would allow you to get past the filibuster and get something passed at the federal level. Or you could, there's always the possibility that at some point in the future, Democrats will decide that the filibuster is no longer working for them, and they will decide to blow it up,
Right.
right? Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
or that if the Republican agenda becomes something other than tax cuts and judges, which conveniently have been exempted from the filibuster, maybe they'll decide to get rid of it.
Right. And so if they wanted to, I think right now that the argument for the Democrats blowing up the filibuster is that the things that Donald Trump is doing, he is effectively uh, dismantling government programs without having new legislation to that effect. And so, the thing that would be blocking Republicans from passing that legislation would be the filibuster. But if they can do it anyway without the filibuster, then it may just make sense to just get rid of the filibuster because it's no longer serving any purpose for Democrats, right? But that's a lot of ifs and
Sure.
possibilities and question marks, and I think the most probable roadblock in the near term for this is going to be some manner of Voting Rights Act litigation that could at least slow it down so that it um, couldn't be implemented in time for the 2026 election. But um, that's going to depend a lot on the maps that are drawn and the courts that hear them. So
Sure. Yeah, and one imagines a lot of that would end up in the shadow. So much of what's happening right now in the Supreme Court has been on the shadow docket, where Republican initiatives are greenlit and Democratic ones are redlit, with no explanation. So one also wonders if they will find a way to stop it in California and allow it in Texas. I'm very cynical about the Supreme Court, but it's pretty well warranted at this point.
Well, one thing I've been curious about is, I mean, we've seen some resistance within Texas to this plan, and that from Democrats in the Texas legislature who have fled the state, mostly to Illinois, to deprive the legislature of a quorum so they can't actually pass this new bill. Now I don't know how long that goes, but we're seeing some sort of like cross state party coordination there, and I'm wondering if like that spreads to other states too. Obviously, it'd be a different set of issues because not every state legislature is in session year round. Not every state has this same set of quorum rules. There's a lot of unknowns here, but like just as quickly as gerrymandering can spread, so can resistance to it.
yeah, and, although I would say the Democrats in the Texas legislature did the same thing 20 years ago with the mid-decade redraw that was at issue in this Supreme Court case I mentioned. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and they ultimately caved and came back, and there was a quorum, and the new plan passed. And I would expect the same thing to happen here. So they're raising visibility for the issue, but I don't think realistically they can hold out forever, and they're going to eventually come back, and this thing is eventually going to pass. It would be my expectation. Um, so there's not a lot of. I mean, yeah. So there's the protest approach that Democrats can
Right.
take, which they are sort of taking, and there is a kind of higher visibility to this issue as they are, um, you know, raising us think about it. But I don't think it's going to actually stop anything by itself from happening. If that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, would this be a good place to pivot to some food discussion?
Is it? If everybody's a little bit depressed, sure, let's do that.
Yeah, yeah. So Eric, you're our guest. We'll let you go first, but what's been going on cooking wise in your household lately?
Well, so my son is heading off to college in a month. So UCSB.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Feels like an amazing accomplishment. And he didn't get a job, and so which we wanted him to, and so we said, all right, well, if you're not going to be employed, then you have to make dinner for us every night. And he actually really likes cooking, so he not only decided that that was okay with him and he was going to make dinners, but he was going to have a different theme for the dinners in every week. So we've had just this amazing range of different cuisines. Like we had Mexican week, we had Greek week, we had Thai week, we had Chinese week, we had Japanese week, We had Moroccan week, which was the one that worked out the worst because it turns out Moroccan food really needs to cook for a long time, and he didn't pay attention to that. He would open up the recipe, when it was like, oh, it's like 6 o'clock at night, and it's like, oh, it has to stew for 4 hours, right? Um, but it was, the things he made were great when they were done. And then now we're in like more of a sub-Saharan African week. We had like a Nigerian stew, and then I don't actually know where we had like a vegetable rice dish last night that was, I don't know where exactly it was from, but it was really good too.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been great. It's been a lot of fun.
Good on you for raising him so well. This is a great set of skills to bring to college. Yeah.
Yeah,
I did not have that skill set going to school.
It started when he was during COVID, because we cut off his access to his iPad and to his phone because he was using it way too much. Except we allowed him to still use Masterclass because we figured it was educational. And so then he just spent all of his time on Masterclass and went through all the cooking shows that they had on Masterclass and got really into it. So.
Wow.
Something good that came out
stuff there. Yeah. John, what's been going on with you?
So it was my mom's 80th birthday. We celebrated my mom's 80th birthday this week, and the whole family got together in a cabin in northern Wisconsin. And I did what I always do, which is cook too much. But I had a lot of people to cook for. But what was really exciting, my mom's family is from northern Michigan, and it is tart cherry season in northern Michigan right now. So I found a hookup that would put 20 pounds of tart cherries on a truck in Traverse City and send them to me here in Minnesota. So I showed up at this cabin with a pickup truckload of tart cherries, and I made the children pit them, which was an exciting adventure for them. They did like 4 each. And then we made cherry pies, and we made ice cream, and we made all sorts of jams and all sorts of delicious things. So that was really fun. And made lots of cakes, and I made burger buns for the brats. Like I did too much, because when the family's together, I just hang out in the kitchen and I make everybody come and hang out with me. So
awesome.
It was really fun. Yeah. How about you? You're back in Colorado, right?
Back in Colorado. I think I mentioned in our last episode, it is Palisade peach season here in Colorado. These wonderful peaches that grow on the western slope here. And I have since purchased a bunch of them because there's people selling them on every street corner in Denver, and they're fantastic. And so I made a peach pie the other day, which, I don't want to, toot my own horn, but it's the best pie anyone's ever made. But like I did, and I regret that it has taken me so long to learn this, but I read this thing about how to prepare peaches for a peach pie. A lot of people recommend taking the skin off ahead of time, because you leave the skin on, it gets a little gross. It can be a little tart, and you don't want it. And I've tried peeling peaches in the past, and it's honestly really difficult. And it turns out, okay, all you need to do is blanch the peaches. You put them in boiling water for like 30 seconds and score one side of them, and the skin comes right off, and it's such a nice job, and it makes a pie so much better. So I'm grateful for that knowledge.
Better living through chemistry or physics or whatever.
Yes. Well, I think that's all we've got for today. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. This was a really helpful discussion.
Oh yeah, no, I'm absolutely. This was a lot of fun. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Eric.
And thank you, John. This was great. Thank you for listening to this episode of Power and Flower. This episode was produced by Eli Maskett. We encourage you to follow and rate this podcast wherever you listen to it. Watch for new episodes at the end of each week.